Welcome, everybody, to today's podcast, IDI in Conversation. IDI stands for International Dialogue Initiative, who meet and engage in discussions of political and societal developments aiming at a psychological understanding of societal conflicts. My today's guest is Anna Zajenkowska from Poland. Welcome, Anna. I'm so glad to have you with us. Hi there. First, I want to introduce Anna to our listeners before you will hear her own voice. Anna Zajenkowska is Associate Professor and Head of the Doctoral School of the Maria Grigorievska University in Warsaw. She has a PhD in Humanities from the Department of Psychology. She is a trained group analyst, member of the IGAR, that means Institute of Group Analysis, Rostov, Scientific Community, and delegate to the group section of the European Federation for Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy. That's already quite a lot. All her activities, including therapeutic clinical work, focus on working with groups and facilitating communication between different communities. She is one of the founders and main organizers of the Poland on the Couch project, an initiative started by group analysts and aimed at building a safe space for conversation. Moreover, she is the editor, together with Uri Levine from Israel, of a psychoanalytic and social cultural exploration of a continent, Europe on the Couch, and a number of papers recently, very often about hostile attributions. Okay, Anna. This project, that's for me, it's just the idea to try to get into some conversation what's going on in Poland. So many people all around the world, not just especially for Poland, have the idea that the world became crazy even before the pandemics, and even more so now with the pandemic. So if the world is crazy, it might need a sound clinical diagnosis. For your country, you carried out such a diagnosis, creating the project Poland on the Couch. Could you first tell us something about the setting and how the idea of the project came along and how it went?
Thank you, Regina, for the invitation, first of all. That's very interesting when you ask about the diagnosis, because I think many people are asking for the diagnosis of the social situation in Poland or in the world. However, the project's aim is not to make the diagnosis, but more to create a space where we can understand the process. And by understanding, we can perhaps facilitate it, we as citizens. So that's the idea behind, which is quite challenging, I believe. So it all started in 2013 with a conference, and part of the conference were workshops. And we found out that, of course, it's interesting to listen to lectures and to discuss. However, it's much more vivid and interesting to have a workshop where we all can participate and speak up our thoughts. So that's how it started. And I thought that it would be great to invite not only psychologists, but also wider audience to such workshops, citizens, everybody who wanted to participate, to reflect on current events, political, social, economic. And that's how it started. Still, the challenge is to invite people from outside of the psychology. So there are many psychotherapists coming and attending, more and more people with different professions, and students, for example, also. So this is what we do. We meet every year, a few times a year in different cities in Poland, and we try to discuss what's going on using psychoanalytic methods. So to better understand the process. So that's why we have group analysts who come and try to understand and analyze the processes going on during those workshops. So yes, and I think it's true that currently we are under tremendous level of stress and anxiety, and it was already before COVID. And I think with the development of social media, we have access to so many information, which basically are triggering our stress because we hear, and it's even strengthened by media. We hear about so many crises in the world and about financial crisis, climate crisis, and every day it seems like the world is collapsing. So facing this reality can create an extreme level of anxiety. So I think this is the situation we are all in.
I would be interested, what did you learn about your country whilst listening to your fellow countrymen and women? Are there main areas of topics and concerns that are dealt with repeatedly? And if so, of course, which ones?
It's a very interesting question again. There are certain topics which keep repeating themselves. So during the first years when we were organizing Poland on the Couch, we talked quite a lot, I would say, about our past, about our history related to the Second World War. So the Holocaust was one of the major topics. And the question was how to talk about this traumatic event in our history, obviously. But with the time, the topics that are present during our workshops are more related to the current situation. So, for example, it's interesting to observe the processes within the group. The idea that people who participate in our workshop, that we all share the same view, that we all share the same norms, and that we are a very homogeneous group, which we are not, obviously. So the moment when we discover that we are so much different, and that's very interesting. So this is what's going on. This is one of the topics. So how can we talk to each other, having such different ideas about the whole world, about economy, for example, or about gender issues, right? So how to talk to each other. One of the very important thing that I see, the idea is that we as in-group members of any group, right? But we are all in certain groups, that we as in-group members, we believe that the out-group members, that they are perceiving us in a very negative light, that they don't like us, that they humanize us. But we are very open and we want to talk to them. However, when we look at the situation during our workshops, as well as studies, like study results conducted recently in Poland, we can see that very often we as in-group members, we are the ones who perceive the others in a very hostile manner, and that we are the ones having this very narcissistic idea about our greatness, and that the others are worse. So I think this is the problem that we are facing right now, and I think it's crucial for the communication with others, because without the openness and the idea that we are also the ones having quite hostile view of others, we can't proceed with creating dialogue.
Yes. Well, that alludes to all the divides in society and the them and us, what so easily comes up. Seen from outside, very, very much outside,
Yes.
the official Polish politics often seem to reflect a deep feeling being threatened by the complexity and fluidity of modern times, where traditional structures don't hold anymore. The changing role of women, you mentioned that before, also gender issues, and the severe conflicts about the new abortion law might be a paradigmatic example for these processes, traditional versus fluid modernity in a certain way. Is that something that you can support from your experience in the project?
The attitudes toward women is like it is in Poland, I think is quite similar in other countries. There is this great book by Perez about data bias, how the world is constructed on male samples, based on studies made on male samples. So yes, there is the change where women are being more present in politics, taking positions of authorities in different areas. And this is happening. and it seems that it's threatening to part of the society, and I can imagine it's threatening to men because it challenges the position that they have within the society. And again, this is my understanding. When I think about the current crisis related to the abortion law or LGBT and the attitude toward this group, I think it's related to the fact that our population is declining. So there is a great decline in the number of children that are being born. And it's an issue, it's a challenge. One might think it's a problem, but it's a challenge because within 10 years, 20 years, the society structure will change dramatically. And this is happening. So we'll have a great number of people over 60. If this is the case, we have to adjust our health system, our transportation system, everything within the country. And we have to acknowledge that fact. So having lesser kids and more elder people, we have to address this issue. And we will have less and less people to work. However, I'm saying it's not a problem. It could be a challenge because at the same time, the job structure worldwide is changing. Many jobs are disappearing. Many new jobs are being created. There's also the technological development that is happening. So these are all those issues about which we could speak and talk. But instead of doing that, because I understand it could be threatening or it could be stressful, it's much easier to manage, for example, the anxiety by moving it towards, for instance, the abortion law. I think it's a facade and it's not the real social problem that we should be discussing right now. So that's how I understand it.
Okay. Yes, there's a demographic challenge all over Europe, and the countries respond in different ways to it. And of course, in such a Catholic traditional country as Poland, there's a danger you get an abortion law the way as it is planned now. Maybe that connects also to the other question, also seen from outside. Poland seems to struggle whether it wants to be a modern, open society from the Near Middle East. But also, as you mentioned, in the fight against LGBT rights. Mm-hmm. So Poland is really in front of this fight. What are the comments you hear about these topics in your project? Because, well, these are very complex changes in society, in attitudes and moral and so on. So I can easily imagine that there is a heated debate about this or that, or maybe there's not. Maybe it's a fantasy.
It's hard to say because the last workshop was in March, just before the pandemic started, and just before all the issues you are mentioning right now with the LGBT rights and with abortion started. So they were not really much present during our workshops. I'm sure they will be next year when we come back with our meetings, hopefully spring. But right now it's hard to say like what the comments are because we are not meeting. The refugee topic was very much present and we talked about it. And it was very interesting, again, because part of the society was saying we have to close our borders and it's like we should not allow people with different mindset, different religion to come to our country. And there was another group saying, let's open and let's invite everybody. And of course, you could observe again the polarizing effect. And during the workshops, when we started talking about it, we were saying that of course, it will be great to invite people who are in need, but at the same time that we need to discuss how to do it, whether we as a society are ready to do it, which cities, which part of Poland are ready, and how to do it, who and when, and how to invite those people. Can we afford it? What happened during the workshop was, I remember one of them like that, was that to do it, to invite, it's not enough. We need to set a whole plan. How? And again, there was no discussion, open discussion in media or at the social level in Poland about refugee crisis. More, it was like a fight whether to do it or not to do it. But that doesn't solve the problem.
It easily gets like, okay, implied in the last question was also the topic of Poland's attitude towards the EU as a club. They joined voluntarily, though ardently refusing to play along the rules that were made before, claiming their national sovereignty and accusing Brussels of dictatorship.
Mm-hmm.
What did you hear about this?
Okay, this is a very present issue, and it's hard for me to say what are the intentions of their government, and I'm far away from even trying to analyze it because I don't know. But I can tell you that during the workshops we talk, and it shows the issue towards authority as a problem. So how Poles relate to different authorities, and I understand that European Union and the institutions are symbolizing authority. And of course, we can analyze it as a chosen trauma in regards to chosen trauma, that being invaded so many times as a country, as a society, we might perceive some institutions from outside of Poland as invading us. So that could be activated in this situation, possibly. But also, I think that what is shown during workshops and what I think mirrors the situation in Poland is the idea that the authority is neither extremely hostile and angry nor super idealized object, but it's somebody who we can, talk to and we can discuss certain things. And I think during workshops, sometimes the issue of authority and dependency is problematic. For example, we conduct workshops and there are questions. So where's the conductor?
Oh, yeah.
You can analyze it. So the conductor is nowhere, and two people are sitting and conducting the group, and it seems that it's difficult to acknowledge. For example, right now with the government, there is part of the society that is extremely in favor of the current government, but then there's the other part which is extremely against. And it's interesting to observe that the attitudes toward European Union in many cases is similar. So either you are in or you are out. It's like difficult to see that we are really partners and that we can negotiate, but not in a threatening way, saying that if not, we are going away, but like discussing and negotiating what's really behind the law that EU right now is posing, right? About the obeying democratic rules, because this is all about that. The budget is supposed to be connected to obeying some democratic rules. So what's the problem behind it? And yeah.
My next questions about how much these attitudes connect to history, to the chosen trauma of the partitions from this once mighty kingdom that ended in 1795 with the third partition, and then later on two world then the communist rule. So that really is a long history of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Taking that into account, and that's shaping the attitude towards authorities. What I read and heard, I got the impression that, in what I could read, there is a tone that Polish people or Poland often consider themselves as victims. If you take in account all these traumata, it's very understandable. But also even drawing from this victimhood a special kind of pride. We suffered so much, but we survived, and we are back. So drawing some kind of pride from this victimhood, and also a sense of entitlement. We suffered so much, now you have to give us.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you can, at least in parts, confirm from your observations?
This one is a very difficult question because you are telling me from outside how it's being perceived. I think different groups in Poland would give you different answers, like to what you're asking about. Definitely, our history was quite traumatic. I'm not sure if it was more traumatic than the other European countries or not. I think we all of the countries created the history, so we are part of it. So part of it was trauma, part of it was glory. Definitely, when it comes to the war, talking about it and uncovering the history is difficult, and it seems like we did suffer a lot, and we want other countries to acknowledge that. And I think that perhaps this is what is missing in the discussion in Europe, in diplomacy, to acknowledge, right, the horrible experiences of many countries and many societies. And in fact, some of the countries were more the invaders at certain times, and some of the countries were invaded. And acknowledging that, I think it's important. However, when perhaps, and it's only about Poland, but once we open the discussion, and when a certain society is demanding or asking for acknowledgement, the other societies, I believe, maybe feel overwhelmed by this need, or it's too difficult for them to do it. I think it's also very interesting that we are having this discussion. I'm from Poland, you are from Germany, right? And we talk about, I believe, such a very difficult part of our history, right? We talk about victimhood and about invading. So, yep, I think it's part of the history that still needs to be talked through. And for me personally, I think it's very important to think about Germany as a society that also experienced a lot of trauma, which is not being taught that much at our schools. So it's very simplifying view when we talk about the war, right? That, for example, Germany was an invading country, but I believe not. When we think about citizens, there were different groups of people, and this is something. The history is much more complex, and this is what I'm discovering by myself, reading about history, reading books. But when we are taught about it, and very often, I think at schools, it's the history is much more simplified, which is easier to understand.
In preparing this interview, I, of course, had to struggle with the fact of the delicate situation that me as a German, that I'm doing the interview with you as a Polish.
Yeah.
So, and of course, there were lots of things that went through my mind. But what struck me, I don't know how much it's just taken in Poland, but I found this figure that somewhere in Poland there is the idea of Poland as a Christ of the nations, taking on all the sins of the whole world in a certain way, which in a certain way is extreme suffering, but also an extreme moral high stand. If you
Yeah.
consider yourself as Christ, you put yourself very high, I would say. And if these emotional constructions, let's say it like that, are deep in the mentality of people, I think it's what you are claiming the whole time, and I would go with that. It's so difficult to have conversations, to just accept different views, perceptions, and then try to do what to do with them. So, and what I mentioned before was that if these constructions are there, they usually go along with some kind of ideas of entitlement. And if you are in the area of entitlement, you are usually in the area of aggressive from aggression, at least verbal aggression, denigration, contempt of the other, all these things that make it so difficult to get into contact, to get into real contact and have real conversations. Um, you told me that you are working on these hostile attributions and have a project about hostile language. Um, Perhaps just also to study it, to overcome it somehow, I guess. Would you tell us a bit more about it?
Yes, sure, with pleasure. But it's the hostile attributions, and I think that relates to also what you were talking about entitlement. There are studies measuring entitlement in many European countries and in Poland also, and there's this passive and active entitlement and revengeful. So, but what is important is that the diagnosis is very dynamic. So at certain point, a society, like individual also, can have higher level of entitlement. And then due to certain social and contextual factors, the entitlement, the need for entitlement can decrease and then increase. And the same is with hostility. So it's like, for example, when the anxiety is extremely high, when we are threatened, it makes sense to be suspicious of others because something might happen to you. However, if you feel safe, you can start understanding that somebody is doing something to you not because of very hostile intentions but because of certain contextual or situational factors, right? For example, I can understand that right now with COVID, which is a very high trigger of stress, because it activates the fear from death, because we are living in fear from death. Everybody can, get sick and unfortunately die. So I think that creates high tension and stress, and that increases the hostility in interpersonal relationships and intersocial relationships. So that's how it works. So it does not mean that Polish society or any other society is more hostile in general, but certain situation, this is what I'm saying, certain situation might create matrix in which we behave like we are threatened, for instance. So understanding this matrix, and this is important. So understanding and having the observer from another country or whoever it could be, observing that and naming that and saying, look, guys, it's a very difficult situation. I mean, these are the factors that impact the current hostility level, for example. So let's just try to observe what's going on. This is what is important.
So thank you. Of course, hostility is not a special Polish invention, but I just was asking you because you're studying it.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
But given all that you told me and to me and to our listeners, just to, in a way, to come to an end, what are your expectations or what are your hopes for the future of your country and beyond?
It's a very open question. And what are my hopes? Well, I hope we will be a very happy and community oriented society and we will develop in this direction. No, I hope for the best, but what I hope for? I hope that the pandemic will end soon and that, of course, it will be a process. So I really hope that we will be able as a society, as a Polish society, but also as a European society, to embrace all the crises that will come, which are related to this current traumatic event, so that we will be able to deal with, for example, economic crisis that most possibly will happen quite soon, and that we will be able to see that certain groups are really in need and are entitled to get more than the others, and that we will be able to give it and support it, even though we ourselves will need something. So this is the challenge, to give even though you need.
Okay. Listening to you, what comes to my mind, and I can confirm it now in a different way, is the first line of your national anthem. That Poland is not yet lost.
No,
Definitely,
definitely.
like you. So thank you for the interview and all the best for you personally. Wow, and for the whole community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Regina.
Bye, Anna.
Bye.